Socialism is something that grows up before Marx. It is a response to capitalism. Socialism has always been the critical response to capitalism. Because I think what socialism has always been is capitalism's shadow. The longer we have capitalism, the longer you can be sure we will have socialism, because it is capitalism's self-criticism. It has been generated by capitalism. As capitalism spread around the world, socialism spread a few minutes behind, and that has always been the case, and it hasn't changed. Why was it called socialism, this critique of capitalism? It was called that because capitalism was identified with individuals struggling to make a business, to make the business grow, to gather wealth into their hands. And it created then a gap between those individuals who did that for whatever reason and all the other people who didn't for whatever reason. The employers versus the employees. Those who gathered the wealth and the power into their hands versus those who didn't. And as that system developed, it developed criticism. First, not so surprisingly, from the victims of the process, the people who had nothing, the people who lost in the process, the people who weren't able to compete, the people who had things stolen from them, whatever. And then there were the critics who looked at this system the way it worked and said, this isn't moral, this isn't ethical, this isn't beautiful, this is something that we as human beings can and should do better than. So you had victims and critics, and they tried to develop an alternative. And the alternative they fumbled and bumbled their way to came to be called socialism. Why? Because the idea was we shouldn't have a society where a small group of people control the wealth and power, run the industries, and the rest of us depend on them. We rather think of the society this way. Production is a social activity we all participate in. The wealth that's created in a society is based on what we all as human beings do, plus what the earth, which no human being put there, enables us to have. It's a social, it's a community activity. And socialism then meant we should socially organize production, socially decide who gets what, socially distribute the power amongst ourselves in a way that we can all deem moral and decent and fair. And so the idea was capitalism is a system, to be blunt about it, for the few individuals who either inherit the wealth or steal the wealth or make the wealth by dint of hard labor, that too, but who distinguish themselves not by the work they did, the quality of the work they did, but by the wealth they've amassed and the power they've accumulated. And that comes at the expense of everybody else, and that produces a society torn apart by envy, bitterness, rancor, anger, and all of those other things. And the socialists said, no, let's not do that. And particularly, once Marx becomes the thinker for this movement, which only happens after socialism is already there, when he becomes a thinker, his focus is, let's be sure to organize the system of production in an equal, democratic way, because that way we can make sure that the wealth is fairly distributed and the power is fairly distributed.